invited into this magical day that you're having. And I am just cherish my relationship with Lotus, and I'm super happy to get to be piped in via cyberspace to be with you today. And I hope I get a chance to meet some of you in person someday. So my name is Cassandra Ferreira, and I live in Northern California in West Sonoma County in the outskirts of Sebastopol. And I have made it my career to blend my passion for community, permaculture, and real estate. Now, I wouldn't say real estate is a huge passion, but it is become one because of the way that I've been able to bring my commitment to community and permaculture to the practice of real estate, because all of us got to find our place on the earth, and it really helps to be able to cross that bridge of actually acquiring property with your community, and to have somebody like myself who understands all the ins and outs of what it takes to be a successful group that acquires property and then begins the ultimate adventure of recreating our tribe in our place and our sacred relationship with the earth. So I'm super blessed because I work with a great company called Green Key Real Estate, owned by two of my best friends, and they are very progressive in their values and see me as a big asset in terms of the vision, the village vision that I bring, and they're very supportive, which is great. So so I work with Green Key Real Estate. You can check them out. And by way of introduction, I'll just say a couple more things, and that is that because it's such a substantial endeavor to successfully purchase property as a community, I have over the years gotten more and more into consulting and education. My exposure to so many different groups has really taught me a lot about about the nature of group dynamics and what it takes. And so I'm not so much a group process consultant myself, but because I understand the whole piece in relationship to land and law and finance, that has meant that I've gotten more into consulting and education. And in fact, I've teamed up with some incredible partners, and we're working on bringing an online educational context for people like yourselves, where you could work with people all over the place who are tackling the same issues that you are, and be supported by each other, and also by professionals who are dedicated to what you are. So there'll be more about that. I'm sure Lotus will help me get the word out to all of you as time goes by and that offering is more clear, but definitely looking forward to this year and what it'll bring. How's that for a good beginning, Lotus? You want to say anything?
That sounds perfect. Just that I'm so happy to be bridging the community development work that I got to be a part of in Sebastopol through bringing you in, and also that you live in community and have lived in communities. And so not just as a professional, but you also have all that experience having lived it yourself, and, you know, both the lessons learned and, you know, the successes and the challenges and all of it just weave together into your genius that you're bringing to this. So really grateful to have you with us.
Thank you.
Yeah, so do you have kind of a map for us of what you're going to cover today?
Well, what I feel like we can talk about is the process where you've got wonderful people that you adore, and or at least you feel like, a lot of times we just really feel like, wow, I could really live with you, and kind of how to ground that excitement, that vision down into the ground, and actually literally our relationship with the place and the structures that we have to navigate in order to successfully have a community, and on usually one piece of land that we all need to share. So a lot of times, you know, people have so I guess I'm not totally giving you a roadmap. I'm just kind of diving in. Okay, so I'm just gonna go for it and kind of, give you like the pattern level, and you can ask me some questions if it helps to get more information of what you want. But I'm just gonna give you some pattern level perspective on this journey that it sounds like all y'all in the room are on at some point in the on the journey. So, I'm gonna highlight some stuff that I've learned from the field. The One of the most important things to realize is that yes, there are big challenges to co-owning one piece of undividable property, which is often what the zoning regulations in our areas lead us to. There are lots of community solutions, in maybe not lots, but a handful, in which you can own your own parcel and part of a connected thing, or a co-housing. But and we can talk about that if you want to, but quite often what comes down to is that we're actually co-owning something that we can't divide and like have our own private section of. And so one of the things that we need to realize is that this issue of privacy is ingrained in us as raised in the United States with Western mentality, and as awesome and visionary as we are, we have vestiges of something inside of us that thinks that we have to have something that's ours and that we might need to protect. And so that's something that it raises its head on the community journey, and it's really important to put that in front of you and to really ask yourself the questions. And I have a different presentation where I can show you the sharing spectrum, because there really is a spectrum of sharing. And some people are like totally down to live in the same house with other people their whole life. And then there are a lot of us who say, I really want to live in community. I might be up for sharing houses for a little while, but eventually I'm going to really need to have my own space. And I think that can be very healthy, and it's really good to know. Like, I need my own kitchen. I need my own little space for my family to get to have our vibe inside of the context of this larger community that we live in. And that's totally great. And so to try to understand yourself better, I understand you guys did some inner work this morning, and that's really, like, I can't stress that enough, the inner work of the community member, like really assessing what your capacity is for sharing, and also knowing that might change over time, and knowing that you doing the work of being an excellent communicator, having really healthy boundaries, or knowing that you're on the path of having healthy boundaries. And also that you're going to loosen some of the places where you may be a little bit held tight, and that's not about not having healthy boundaries. That's actually about trusting. So doing the work of learning how to trust and knowing that you're going to be responsible for your shadow in the context of community. Because we all know that in intimate partnerships, the shadow comes up, our shadows come up, and there's stuff that we need to deal with. And when you get in community with people and you put you go all in on a project together, you are like essentially marrying each other through your relationship to that place and the commitments that you're making to live in community. And so when you do that, then imagine that your shadow that's so hard for you to see, that's really hard when your partner sees it and shows it to you. Imagine that there's like 5 or 10 or however many other people that are really good at seeing your shadow, and you're really good at seeing theirs. And so we'll totally talk about zoning and finance and organizational structure and all that great stuff. But a lot of people like to focus like, oh, there's where the impediments are. Okay, yeah, we've got some design challenges there. But do not underestimate the need to do the internal work and to really know that you're going to be confronted by your shadow and other people's shadows, and what do you guys do when that comes up? And what is going to be the structure that holds you together, that helps you to safely process that, so that you can deepen in trust with each other and also have healthier boundaries yourself. And I'll say one last thing about that is that I definitely, I'm holding my hands like this is the circle of all of you together in your group, having a vision that unites you and brings you out of just that sort of like two-dimensional plane of your interrelationships with each other. Really having a vision that pulls you up, and even though sometimes you're like, oh gosh, I'm really frustrated by this process or these people that I love so much, you're like, but we have a vision. We're called to something that's greater than just this drama that we're temporarily engaged in. So the vision, super important. And then what I've also really seen, calling people out, and it's part of that vision, but it's a very real thing, and I understand you're also working on this too, and that is going down and rooting into the earth, rooting into your place, and realizing that the land that you're having your community on is a member of your community and is calling you into being as well. As one of the farmers on one of the projects that I'm working on right now, he says, you know, we farm the land, but the land farms us. And so to really get that our relationship with the earth is also like root down, root in. And, you know, it's really important that we're all connected to the fact that we're maturing, we're going through initiations, we're people on a life path, we're growing up, and we're growing down. We're like settling down and opening up and healing trauma. And so again, put all of that out on the table, put it inside of your circle, and learn how to listen to the emergent between you and the wisdom that you all have. And yes, there's tons of resources, and I'm a resource and consultant, and yeah. And like, you know, and learning how to trust that your circle has so much wisdom in it, and that, you know, is I think one of the really beautiful parts about what we're doing in the communities movement. I just said a whole bunch, so that was a first level of the sort of more personal, interpersonal part. Good, yes.
Very reinforcing of what this whole day is about, really. So thank you for that. And just a reminder that, yeah, like there is this emergent consciousness. I've been saying a lot lately how this feels like we're actually just all conduits of what the earth wants, that the vision is actually coming from the earth, and it's just through that circle that it's getting expressed in words or actions or whatever. But yeah, it feels to me that this is something that being wants, and we're the conduits of that, we're the vehicles of that, and we've got to figure out how to merge our humanity with that. And it starts with relationship and personal awareness, and then how do we start to build structures? Like, what is that progression from like, oh, okay, I have this spark, I know I want this now. Okay, maybe I have this group of people that maybe we have the same vision, we don't quite know yet. Like, what do you being the progression? I mean, it definitely sounds like taking our time is important, but can you see like milestones along that pathway, or kind of how you would suggest someone sequence the process of going from like, I know I want this, you want something similar, how do we go from that to deciding to do it and buy land, you know?
Yeah, totally. And so there isn't a formula for it, and there is a pattern. And so pattern is that I can see is that there's definitely the burning souls among us. Like, there's those of us who are like, I have to do this, even if it's messy, even if it's not my biggest vision that's possible. Like, I just have to get on this path because it's what I'm here to do. And so those burning souls sometimes think that they need to do it with other burning souls, and sometimes that is the originating group. And And then other times there's people who are like, well, if you build it, I'll come, or, if you build it to a certain level. So I think knowing that there's different characters that are going to play a role in this journey that you, or either as an individual or a couple or a small group, that you, that there's a need to really anchor in to your energy and what it is that you're desiring, and do some of that inner work of mapping what it actually looks like for you. Is it an urban community? Is it a rural community? Are you going to grow food? Are you going to have a mission? Do you have a community? You really get with people and start dreaming, and definitely do it over food. Share food with each other, have meals, and just let the dream move through you and speak through you. And there's all sorts of exercises that you can do once you have a group that's committed, and when you do, so there's sort of like the before you have a group section, when you're like, I don't know if you guys know the children's book, Are You My Mother? But I always think of that, it's like, are you my community member? Are you my mother? And so for me, it was like this sort of like holding this intuitive possibility with people over time, but take the risk, give voice to it, talk about it. A lot of this dream is living inside of people, and they are like, me too, and you didn't even realize it. So allow for the process to also really come from your gut, and not just from your head, because a lot of us are super, we're architects of the new paradigm, and we can come up with all these things, and the water and the soil and the group process and and that's awesome. But really allow yourself to have an intuitive process, and take the risk, bring voice, have potlucks, share food. And then when you have like a group that's like, yeah, we're a working group, like, let's do this, then start to get more formal, and start to do your vision and your mission documents, and really formalize them, like what your decision-making process is going to be, and what your conflict resolution process is going to be. And it's okay to do that in a smaller group of people than you realize, than you may ultimately want to live with. Okay, so it's okay for people to come together, and it's not only okay, it's necessary. And know that people's roles will change. The people that you wrote your original vision and mission statement with you guys might end up going into different communities, but the work that you did in learning how to do that with a group will go forward and be, and have a life of its own. So when you have that group, mission, vision, and also obvious, and like I said, decision making and conflict resolution, tons of resources, get into all that learning. And also start to get more comfortable about being transparent, especially about money. So start to, like, when you have a trusted group that you're like, wow, we're going to really seek to do this, be willing to say, yeah, I declared bankruptcy 5 years ago and I'm recovering my credit, but I have this I can bring. Wow, well, I happen to have a trust fund and I really want to be an equal, but it's very hard for me because I have access to all these resources and people always give me more power than I want. Or like the people, we're coming from so many different places financially, and that is one of the hardest things for us to just go ahead and like get transparent about. And I wouldn't recommend doing that like prematurely, but when you really start to drop in with people, like if you're thinking about buying land with them, you need to show your hand and like show it fully, because because people want to, like, they're like, they get a group together. This used to happen to me a lot early on in my career. I was like, sure, I'll go out and show property to you just because you're a cool group of people. And then they might actually find something that they liked, but they didn't know how the heck they would actually buy it. And so it's super important for you to put all of that information out so you can strategize. And what I've done with clients is sometimes not everybody
like
what?
Oh, sorry. It froze out, so I didn't know you were talking still. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Hopefully it's all good. I've had people, I forgot where I was. It was about finances. Oh yeah, I have people who go through what I call the bottleneck of acquisition, because acquiring land, because of all of the issues relative to mostly finance and lending, often the smaller amount of people who are actually on the purchase contract, the better. Now, very often my clients, when they have a really solid team, they've got their financial piece together, or at least enough heading in the right direction, because sometimes during a real estate contract you're still fundraising, so that's okay, but you need to have a plan that you're going to be fundraising for. And so you get your group, and I also want to add in there, part of why it's good to do with a small group is that you can really build the door. That's one of the things that Diana Leaf Christian, who I recommended the Creating a Life Together book to you, Lotus. And that is a great resource, Creating a Life Together by Diana Leaf Christian. She calls it building a door. And the small group builds the door that the larger like circles of people that may join the community might walk through. And that what's in that door is actually your vision, and what do you want to do here, and what's your idea for what this is actually going to look like. And you sort it out, like, this is going to be a vegetarian community, this is going to be a spiritual community, we're going to have the value, this may be an income sharing community. I mean, there's like so many things that characterize each of our unique tribes that are coming together. So you go ahead and you take the risk with that group to build the door, okay? And then that helps other people know how to get involved with you at different stages of the process. But back to the bottleneck part. Sometimes I notice it'll start kind of big, like there'll be like a lot of people, a big vision, and then as you start to get more serious, it gets more grounded, and even a smaller group of people, and it might seem like, oh, we're losing support. Not necessarily. Can be very natural. And then when you go to make that relationship a place, when you go through the real estate process, which can look lots of different ways. Sometimes it doesn't have to be as hairy as I might be like alluding to right now, but often it is, because that property is listed by a regular real estate agent who's not as unconventional as I am, and you got to get through that process to then open back up again, get on that land, start that sacred relationship with place, and really then open up to larger community, not only living there, but also supporting what your community is doing. But who's going to make it through that squeeze? And when you're in the real estate process, it's called, you're in contract, and the best metaphor is birth. And so I often feel like a midwife, because the best metaphor when a group of people, anybody really, but definitely in our case, when you're in contract on a piece of property, you're in contract, you experience contractions. So there's all sorts of waves of contraction that are lined out in the contract, and there's huge decisions that your group is going to get pushed up against in that process that have to do with oftentimes big money and stretching beyond anything anybody's ever stretched before, and for the vision. So you can see how it's a lot like having a baby. You know, you're like, wow, we're going to give birth to this community and this land, and we have this vision, but boy, do we have to really like breathe when we're really squozen and really stretch to open ourselves. And so it's like your first initiation. Maybe it's not your first, maybe your community, you guys have been through a lot together, which is great. Please do go through a lot of stuff together so you really trust each other when push comes to shove. But for some people, that I've worked with, they get inside of that birth canal, and it's the first time that they're having some of the most difficult conversations that they have, with each other. And sometimes they pop out of the process. And I don't like it when that happens. If it's for a really good reason, that we're not going to give birth to that baby, if it's for a really solid and important reason, I totally accept it as part of the process. But most people end up pretty disappointed and take a while to have to kind of put themselves back together again to go at it again. So I would recommend that you prepare yourself for that, and that you anticipate that, and that you work with people like myself and other professionals who support this process to really prepare, be prepared. And then it can, it's hard, but it's also really exciting. And yeah.
Cool. Yeah, I had a couple questions that came up in that. One was when you mentioned the financial transparency and the value of having maybe a smaller group sometimes in the beginning, and you mentioned something about who has the most resources, maybe thinking they have the most power in the system. And I imagine there's any infinite number of configurations of how people come together around financing a project. It sounded like some may even go traditional routes with mortgages and whatnot. Can you generalize? I mean, particularly if you have a couple models that you've seen that really work,
Mm-hmm.
does it make sense to have, try to design it so you have an equal number of decision makers who are all equally invested? Or have you seen it work where it's off balance in terms of who owns the equity? Can you tell us a little bit about the scenarios around that piece? Because I think that's a really big question for a lot of us.
For sure. So one of the best legal structures that has the flexibility that most of my clients use to acquire property is the LLC. And so the LLC does allow for people to have equal decision making and different levels of investment. And so you can set it up so that you can come into it with different financial pictures, but ultimately have the an equal vote. And so that's one way. And another way to look at it is that the business entity that is the LLC that owns the land may have a personal loan from Jane, who is able to loan the LLC $1 million to buy the land, but Jane doesn't want anybody to not feel secure there or like they don't have power. So you encode it as the LLC owns the land, and that's who's on title. But then Jane's loan to the LLC can be recorded at the county as a private loan to the LLC, and that protects Jane in the event that this wonderful group that she's even part of has some unexpected issues come up and they don't make it. Jane's investment is still secured against the property. But in the day-to-day decisions and what's happening, she's just like everybody else. And so that's one thing. And then the business itself is paying back Jane over time. And then everybody's equally invested in it over a course of a period of years, sometimes decades. And so there's other financial modeling that you can do that basically you have like a timeline trajectory, and you have there's value.
Can you start over, because it did this weird thing, this glitchy thing again? So you said I lost you at there's other financial value or something.
Okay, so there's other financial ways that you can see this, where you have like a timeline trajectory at the end of which you're all going to be equally vested, but at the beginning there could be radically different inputs, but over time, by the end of it, you get to equal investment if that's what it is that you're desiring. Now, actually, let me finish this thought, and then I'll throw in another little loop. There's a cash, like an actual cash in thing that can change between the beginning and the fully vested time. There's sweat equity. And then there's also like monthly payments, a monthly capacity to contribute. And so you can, so those things can change over time and can equalize what is unequal at the beginning, but that you drive it towards equality. And there's resources for this that, in terms of how to actually spreadsheet that, but you can kind of get the picture. Now, one of the challenges is also when you have different sizes of houses on the property and different maybe legalities of those houses. And so sometimes that can be reflected by different shareholdings in the LLC or different buy-ins, like, okay, well, that's cool that you've got 700,000 that you can either bring in cash or borrow, and I've only got 300,000. Well, you take the big house and I'll take the smaller house. And so there's also some equalizing around that. And so I want to say that with finance, this is a big piece that people have to achieve, that transparency and that problem solving. So you can put it all on the table and figure it out. But then also zoning regulations are a really big issue. And what I want to imprint upon you all is that legal is the big hack. So for where we've really encoded a more private, value system inside of our county and city zoning regulations and also our banking system. And so those can be very tough codes to crack in the shared lifestyle that we're seeking. Law is one of your biggest helpers in this. And so that's another thing to really embrace, is that cooperative law has kept pace with our desire to share property. And there are amazing attorneys, non-adversarial attorneys, who are teaching other attorneys, who are writing books for the public. The big hub is the Sustainable Economies Law Center by headed up by Janelle Orsi and Jenny Casson. Actually, I'm not sure how much Jenny Casson is involved in that, but Janelle Orsi in the East Bay in California and Berkeley. So Google that, Sustainable Economies Law Center, SELC. And I can also help with personal referrals to attorneys that I've worked with. But there are our access to really awesome legal agreements that protect our relationships with each other. And I would not wait on that. I would put that way before you need it. Meaning don't have the oh shit moment and then say, oh my gosh, what are we going to do when somebody breaks up and blah, blah, blah. Do it all before. Think of, and it's hard when you're all in the visionary phase. You're like, I don't want to think about what's going to happen when I don't want to live here with you all, or my mom dies and I have to move back to Ohio, or I don't want to think about those things. Or when we start defaulting on our payment, you don't want to think about those things. But actually, it's better to think about them when they're not issues and go ahead and codify them into your legal agreements with each other, because then you can go about the business of doing what you came together to do. And then those legal agreements help you navigate the fact that you're sharing an undividable interest in a piece of property. They help you navigate the fact that Amy came in with more than Daniel. They help you navigate all those things and put it all in clear agreement, so then you can go about making the fun decisions, like how many chickens are we going to have, or when are we going to have our May Day festival or whatever. So is this helpful?
Yeah, that's really great, just perspective on that piece. And yeah, like not to be reactive about getting legal counsel, but to be proactive about exploring those kinds of contractual type agreements, even outside of purchasing and financing and stuff.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about what you were saying in terms of like policies and land use and zoning and stuff like that. But I also was just curious because you mentioned the LLC, and I wondered if you had any examples of like more nonprofit types of ownerships, and if you could speak to that at all, or are there any others besides LLC that you've seen work? Like I know Green Valley, where I lived, was just owned by a family. What do you think about that scenario, or like a nonprofit like Sewing Circle, or how do you see those other legal entities working or not?
Sure. Sure. Yeah. Well, it takes a pretty special person to own a piece of community land that everybody's living on and wanting to create their village at. And I don't recommend that one person owns the whole village. If you can avoid it, I recommend that you give ownership opportunity to everybody, more or less. Maybe not everybody, but like to at least a core set. Like I'm working on a project right now, or we could give La Tierra as an example, in a community here in Sebastopol. There's 4 families that own 4 houses, but they rent out an additional 3 houses. And those renters are totally part of their community, and they do the community dinners and they do all the good stuff with each other. But there's 4 owners that are managing all 16 acres. And so when you're dealing with bigger property, and especially like the Green Valley where you live, if you just have
Hold
one.
on. Start over. It does this crackly thing, so I don't know if you see it on your end, but when you can start with Green Valley again. Thank you.
So when you are at Green Valley, it's you see when one person owns it, the property struggles to come to full life because all the people who are running it don't actually know that they have the security that they can stay there, as long as they desire, but also that that their efforts are going to raise their own lifestyle. So there's always this question of, am I just making the property better for you who own it, or are we improving our shared resource together? And so it's very challenging when one individual or family owns a whole community property. And I also know that because on our land, our original partners left, and their marriage was falling apart, and they needed to take it off property, and left my husband and I owning a community property, which we're now finally ready to start looking at different situations, because we don't want to own a property by ourselves. And so everybody who comes and lives here gets to live in this great village, and we work it out really clearly. Now, this is what we're responsible for, but we really support all of us and having the life that we desire together. But it's very challenging. And so I don't recommend that. And I advise people who if that's what they are desiring, like they really just want to keep it simple, buy a property, have 2 or 3 rentals, run it like a village. I've got years of experience with that, and I can speak to that. And so, but we were talking about the nonprofit. And so many communities blend an LLC with a nonprofit. So you said the nonprofit of Sewing Circle. Sewing Circle is the LLC that owns Occidental Arts and Ecology Center's land, but Occidental Arts and Ecology Center is a 501c3. And those guys have worked out one of the most brilliant systems through which an LLC and a 501c3 like coexist with each other in a way that that really satisfies a lot of needs for the property. Because obviously it's great to be able to have a nonprofit and you can accept donations for tax deductibility. But if a nonprofit, it's very much it can be very challenging for a nonprofit to own land, not necessarily for the nonprofit, but for the interests of the people who live on the land. And so the only nonprofit structure that is great for owning land.
It shows again, sorry. So it's difficult for the people who live on the land.
Yes, because the nonprofit has regulations of who's on the board, and that can change, and those people could make different decisions about the future of the property. And so it's like the ownership is dictated by the board rather than the people who are actually living there. Oh. And so the only nonprofit structure that I'm aware of that this really works to support cooperative ownership is the Community Land Trust. So the Community Land Trust model is a fantastic model in which the Community Land Trust owns the land and actually runs cooperative trainings to support the people who are living in the cooperative structures on the land. And that could be one structure that they're all sharing or homes that they're all living in. But in any case, they own the improvements, the co-op owns the improvements, and the Community Land Trust owns the land. Now, you'd need to have, that's a whole ball of wax, but it's really cool. I'm super into that model. And in fact, helping to get a community land trust going here in Sonoma County. So for when that is the best for people, that we can put that into effect. And that's really good for affordable housing, for permanently affordable housing in a cooperative community, which I'm like, yes. So, but yeah, we see some really great models with the combination of LLC with the nonprofit when you really have a mission that you're doing something together on the land. If you're just owning the land, you can do an LLC, you can do a TIC, a tenants in common, a little less flexible than an LLC, but yeah, there's some ideas.
Great, thank you. And then the other piece, you were talking about the zoning, and I know, I mean, from what I've heard, this is what everyone, especially here in Boulder, is the most concerned about. I mean, money is probably number 2, but zoning is so prohibitive out here.
I've heard.
And I'm really curious, like, if there's any way to be more proactive than having, I mean, what I get afraid about, what I think a lot of us get afraid about is, okay, you're going to go through all that risk that you talked about to buy a piece of land, you know, all of the, you know, the bottleneck and the contractions and the birth that is. And you have to wait till you get on the other side to even get into permitting. I mean, what a humongous risk. Like, if you can't get the permitting that you wanted, who's going to take that risk, right? So is there any way, like, I've heard little rumors and I don't know enough about it, but do you know anything about like what Quail Springs did with a research district, or being able to be more proactive? Is there any way to get more zoning kinds of approvals out the gate, or do you just have to develop somewhere where there isn't zoning prohibitive, you know, prohibitive zoning or whatever? Like, what would you suggest people be as proactive as possible in that context that we're living in right now?
Yeah, absolutely. In the counties that I do most of my real estate transactions in, Sonoma and Mendocino counties, you can do a pre-application process with the county. And so often that will be a condition of our escrow, is that we go into the county with my client's plan. Different heads of all the departments of septic and well and building permits and zoning regulations, all that, they all come into the room and listen to your plan and then basically tell you, these are the things you're going to have to show us. These are the issues that we see. And then you know ahead of time so that you can close escrow on something knowing what you're getting yourself into. Because then, yes, you want to get, you go right into your permit process. So So there's a couple thoughts here. First is that you're going to want to do a risk assessment within your group, because some people have a higher capacity for risk, and so that's not only for the whole process, but even when it comes to housing that isn't fully permitted. And so that's something to think about. Some people are like, oh, we got to do this all above ground because we're going to go for a conditional use permit, or whatever they call it in Boulder. They call that, here in these counties, because we want the public to come to our community. And so we have to do everything above ground. Then there's other communities that that's not going to be their thing, and they're really into alternative and natural building, and they're like, no, I'm going to build my cob house, and it's not going to be permitted, and so that's going to be so you can work. You need to know who you're dealing with, obviously what you want. So as you're building that door together, you know what you're doing, and so by going ahead and going into the county, go, I'm sure you've done this, or some of you have, but you can go in and get their time, usually, even when you don't even have a specific property in mind. You're like, look, we want to do a retreat center with 10 permanent residences. What's it going to take in this county to do that? Do we have to buy something in which that is already a pre-existing use, which is a huge thing that my clients tend to go for? Something that looks anything remotely similar to what they want to do, looking for a property that, that they could slightly change the use permit. But again, it's like the legal part. Just get really proactive with your county. Learn about it. Just find out, what are the ins and outs. There may be some consultants that's what they do, is they help get things through the county. Pool your money. Everybody chip in $100 and hire that consultant to come in and give you like a really clear idea of what it's going to be like for you to create what it is that you're wanting to create. And then realize that there may be some sacrifices that anyways, yeah, you may have to make, right? Like some trade-offs. Maybe that's what we'll call it, a trade-off.
In unpermitted housing, you might have to be kicked out of, or you can only build 2 houses or whatever.
Yeah, or you need to do it in a higher density setting. You need to be willing to do it in a urban or suburban area. And when you wanted to really have 100 acres, and you're like, well, we're gonna have to do it on a smaller lot if density is what we're going. So yeah, just really do your research and do your risk assessment with each other. And yeah, I'm sorry, it sounds like it's really restrictive in Boulder, and even more than here, which is surprising.
Yeah, and I mean, just land in Boulder proper, like Boulder County is like the bigger picture what we're all looking at, but I mean, land in the city of Boulder is ridiculously exorbitantly expensive too. So that's super prohibitive and high risk. One thing I just wanted to ask you about, so you mentioned like being able to get I forgot what you called it, the pre-approval, being able to go into zoning and having it conditional with escrow.
Oh, right. That was called a pre-application process.
Yeah.
So the application would be your real permit. The pre-application would be.
So seemingly you'd also have to do some work with architects and whatnot prior to that, right? Do you have to, or can you just kind of generically write out what you want? Or do you have to have like architects that would do the design for that at that point?
If you feel like you need an architect to do a site plan to really explain to people, but it wouldn't be more than, it depends on the county, and you can get that information from them about what's going to be your best case scenario, but it's probably, you're not going to need anything more than a conceptual drawing from an architect. When in the pre-application processes that I've been part of, well, we had a lot of existing infrastructure, so we didn't feel like we needed to provide that. But yeah, so it's not, again, it's more at the pattern level that you'll be dealing with. So there may be some conceptual drawings, but I don't think you need to worry too much about that. But ask your county, find out from them.
Great. Well, this has been super rich. I think you've answered all my questions. I'm curious if you have any other, like, if there's any other shining star examples of like a community anywhere in the world really, but that you have seen that you just think has nailed it and like they are the best. Like if you have a little story to kind of close us off with about something that can really inspire us in moving forward.
Well, there's like a whole bunch of flashing communities that come through my mind that are really doing it, and like have been doing it. And then, there's a wave of communities that started in the late 60s and early, was really part of a cultural evolution of that time. And our time right now is connected to that time, the time that we're living in right now, in terms of like the great growth cycles and astrological growth patterns for humanity. Like we're connected to that time, and now's the time for us to really to pick it up in a really powerful way. And I guess the inspiration that I would leave you with is that this is in our nature. Like this is what, whether you perceive of it as the earth is calling us into this next iteration of our complexity, or however it is that you see it. But what I like to really reflect to people is that yeah, it takes effort and it takes showing up and being brave and confronting your ego and like all that stuff. But there's also something that's just so infinitely wise about our own bodies and our own instincts and intuitions. We are our bodies, as we all know now, with all this great microbiome research is coming out, we are communities. And this is in our nature. We know how to do this in our bones. And it's new, it's different than it's ever been before for humanity, but it's happening. We're part of a movement that is unstoppable, and it's only a matter of time before all of us are weaving our lives back together in place and learning how to live in harmony with each other and the earth. So you're part of something. You're part of the life force that is, it's unstoppable. So take heart in that. And blessings.
Very well said. Thank you so much, Cassandra.
Thank you. Bless you on the rest of your day, and I'll look forward to supporting you in the future.